Hey everybody, Chris, the old-ass retro gamer here. I am back with another long-ass pickups video. Keep on saying in every one of these videos that I'm going to break them up into smaller videos along the way, mixed in with everything else, in order to not have just stacks of games to talk about, but it never seems to work out that way. I just can't catch a break. Be prepared. This one's going to be a doozy. So this pickup video is focusing on everything that I got once I got my tax return for this year and everything up until now. And this year I decided to spend it in two very specific ways, which I will get into later. But let's just start with the pickups. Godzilla. It was one of the first games I ever had for the NES, and I played it to death. And while it isn't the greatest thing ever, it's still pretty cool. At least nostalgia factor-wise. Time Soldiers, which is a top-down action shooter type game, which reminds me a lot of Alien Syndrome. It's not too bad. Ys, The Vanished Omens, action RPG awesomeness. And I did show this one off in the review of the Retro Freak Gear Converter, GG Alesta 2. This is a reproduction of a Game Gear game that is able to be ported onto a Master System cartridge. Why? I don't know, but that's the way it worked out. This game was only released in Japan. We never got it over here, and it's a shame because it is a fantastic top-down shooter. For a handheld game, damn. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Got this in a deal in a Facebook group, and the reason I did was because I had just seen the Power Rangers movie, you know, the new one that just came out back in March, and I actually really enjoyed it. I didn't expect to, but I thought it was extremely entertaining, so I was kind of in a Power Ranger mood, even though I was never a fan of the show back in the day. I never even watched it, but I have a couple of the Power Ranger games already, and I was like, okay, let's just try this one too, and it's actually pretty fun. It's just super freaking easy. And along with that, I got Battletoads and Double Dragon, which was by Rare. Awesome combo between two of my favorite franchises in video games. This takes everything that people find frustrating about Battletoads and mixes it with everything that's awesome about Double Dragon. And Sonic and Knuckles. This is a very strange cartridge. It opens up on the top to allow you to plug in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 or 3, and it lets you play as Knuckles in those games, so it's kind of like the first backwards compatible type cartridge, or DLC-esque if you want to say, because Sonic and Knuckles is its own thing, but it's just kind of cool that you're able to go back and replay the old games in a new way. It was unique at the time. Everyone thought it was kind of awesome, myself included. Loadstar, The Legend of Tully Bodine. It's a full-motion video game that features Otis from Superman the movie. We all can't be winners. At one point, a few months ago, I was really in the mood to play this series of games, so I started actively looking for them, and I got Jungle Strike and Desert Strike. Isometric shooters where you play as a helicopter, and in later games you get to play as different vehicles, going around just shooting every single thing in your path, be it in the air, land, or sea. They're fun games. They are a little repetitive, but they're still kind of rad. And one of my favorite games for the Super Nintendo, Robocop vs. Terminator. This one is not a bloodbath like the Genesis game, which is a shame. This is a completely different game compared to the Genesis one, and it's a side-scrolling platformer, kind of like Contra, but the music is different, the gameplay is different, it's very different. I love this box, though. It looks like a CPU of a Terminator. Still awesome. So when I got my tax return, one of the things I said to myself was I really wanted to beef up my TurboGrafx 16 / PC Engine / TurboGrafx CD / PC Engine CD collection a little bit. Or more than a little bit. I started actively going out and searching for TurboGrafx games and PC Engine games everywhere I could. And I managed to snag quite a bit. Some of them have been on my list for a long time. I managed to get a lot of them for some decent prices, some not so much. I wanted to have these in the collection so bad I was kind of willing to put up with what people were asking for them. R-Type, which is a pretty rad version of this shooter. I do prefer the Super Nintendo version, Super R-Type, but this one is still just as cool. Ordyne, which is another shmup. This one is kind of strange. You play as like who looks like a little kid in an aeroplane shooting shit out of the sky. Legendary Axe 2. I love the first game. It's a classic. I never played this one back in the day. After playing this, I gotta say I kind of like this better than the original. Oh no, you didn't! Galaga 90, which is an update to the classic arcade game. Fantasy Zone, which is a port of the Sega game. I was never very big on this series, but after playing this version of it, I have to say that I'm kind of changing my tune on that a little bit. It's a very fun shmup where you can actually go in different directions, up and down, left and right, all over the place, kind of like the way Defender worked. And instead of just shooting everything that comes at you, there's actually specific like bases floating around that are like spawning enemies that you need to destroy a certain amount of them in each stage in order to progress. And you can buy things to upgrade your ship. And yeah, it's really cool and unique. Bonk's Revenge, which is the second game in the trilogy. More of the same of the first one, which is not a bad thing since Bonk's Adventure is pretty awesome. Bloody Wolf. Now damn, this is a game. Take Contra, change the perspective a little bit, throw in motorcycle riding and grenades and all sorts of other awesomeness. It is just basically a run and gun, but there's so much more things you can do in it. I played this one when it showed up for probably a couple of hours without stopping. Totally amazing. Kadash. This is a port of a very popular arcade game, which is kind of like an action RPG mixed with like a beat 'em up. There's a port of this also for the Genesis, but from what I understand, this is the better version. Although I'm not a big fan of the music, the gameplay is fantastic. Military Madness, which is a strategy game. It's kind of like playing chess, like Archon, where when you take a square that's occupied by your enemy, you end up having to fight over it. But this one, you don't actually do it yourself. It does it based on which army has the greater chance of winning that fight. Very cool game. Newtopia, which is a Legend of Zelda clone, but a very cool Legend of Zelda clone. I mean, everything about it is just taken right out of that game. But enough has been changed to make it its own thing, and I'm not complaining because this is a lot of fun. Lords of Thunder. This is a shmup where you play as a mech that is flying around, blasting things out of the sky like every other shmup you've ever played. The only thing is, god damn, the music in this game is phenomenal. 19 tracks of boner-inducing metal. This one took some doing in order to get because it is kind of sought after and is a little expensive, but sometimes you just gotta splurge. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition. Was not aware that there was a port of Street Fighter 2 to the PC Engine, but it turns out there was. And the cool thing about this game is, this game takes up so much space on a HUD card that they actually had to change the shape. This has like this extra bump on it in order to have more memory, and it is a pretty awesome port. It's kind of hard to control because the PC Engine controller only has 2 buttons as opposed to like the 6 that you're going to need to play a Street Fighter game. It's not too bad. Martial Champion, which is a one-on-one fighting game. This one is for the PC Engine CD. There's 10 different characters to choose from, but the sprites are very small on the screen, but each of them is very unique and has their own moveset, which is pretty cool. At this time, there weren't a whole lot of one-on-one fighting games out there. I think the only other one was the original Street Fighter on the TurboGrafx 16, Fighting Street, which sucked. But I found this at a local store, and I was super thrilled that I did. The original Gradius. I have this, and I also have Salamander, which was Light Force on the NES. My problem with all the Konami shooters on the NES were that, the NES really had a lot of slowdown problems when it came to those types of games. Both this and Salamander have no slowdown problems, and the music is a lot better, the graphics are a lot better, the gameplay is just as good as it has ever been. And in order to read the name of this next game, I'm gonna have to use my phone because this one is kind of complicated. Sadakichi 7, Hideyoshi no Ogan. Yep. It's an action RPG by Hudson, and I looked up some footage before I picked it up. I found this at a local store, and I think they were charging about $5 for it, which is why I was willing to buy it, even though I don't speak Japanese. But I also found that there was a patch available for this in order to play it in English, which is awesome. Managed to upgrade one of my 3DO games, and that's Guardian War. It's an RPG, and all I really had was the disc and the manual in a jewel case, and I had thrown the box away years and years and years ago. So I managed to find a box online for relatively cheap, thus completing it. So I had a great run for Game Boy Advance games. I mean, I just started finding them everywhere I went, especially half-price books. Half-price books is really surprising the hell out of me. I don't know why, but it's like the day that I decided to go and check them out, it's like the day before someone dropped their entire collection of games there for every console. But when it comes to the Game Boy Advance, I was just shocked by the stuff I was finding there. Why are these still sitting here and other people haven't bought them yet? Not that I'm complaining, because I was like, I'll take them off your hands if you don't mind. Pac-Man Collection features 4 different Pac-Man games. You have Pac-Man, Pac-Man Arrangement, Pac-Attack, and Pac-Mania. I did have this one back in the day, but I ended up selling it. Great ports of Pac-Man, and the Pac-Man Arrangement is fun as hell. Konami Collector's Series Arcade Advanced. This has 6 ports of Konami arcade games on it. Frogger, Time Pilot, Russian Attack, Scramble, Gyrus, and Yi Are Kung Fu, which is quite a hard little fighting game. Gumby versus the Astrobots. When I saw this in the case at the half-price books, I was looking at it, I'm like, I remember somebody in a video somewhere saying that this was a very good game that nobody knew anything about. And then it hit me. I was like, oh yeah, that was Metal Jesus talking with Reggie about Game Boy Advance games. So I was like, all right, I'll try it out. And yeah, it is actually a very fun platformer that surprisingly reminds me of Metroid.
What?
Lilo and Stitch? Can't stand the movie that this game is based on, but everyone online keeps on saying that it's a very fun game that has run and gun sections that are kind of like Metal Slug as well as shmup levels. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. I think I paid like $7 for it complete, and it's still sealed, for crying out loud. Gremlins, Stripe vs. Gizmo. I love the two Gremlins movies, and Gremlins 2 for the NES is one of my favorite games for that console. So when I saw this at Half Price Books, I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And it's a surprisingly fun platformer. It's not the greatest thing ever, but for what it is, being a licensed game that, people are automatically going to scoff at, it's actually very well made. As I'm playing more and more games by the developer WayForward, I'm finding that pretty much everything that they have made, that I've played at least, is fantastic in one way or another. So I decided to set another collecting goal, and that is to collect as many WayForward developed games as I can. I don't want all of them. I want most of them. If I can get all of the ones available for the home consoles, fine. But they develop for some weird ones out there like Leapfrog and some other ones I've never even heard of. A lot of PC stuff. But when it comes to the console stuff, there's a lot that looks pretty cool. They do a lot of licensed games, at least when it comes to the handheld systems. One of which is the Scorpion King Sword of Osiris. And I know what you're thinking, you're like, oh god, a game based on that crappy movie? Yeah, well, I said the same thing. But because WayForward developed it, I decided to give it a shot, and it is actually quite fun. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with some platforming elements. Another WayForward developed game is X-Men 3, the official game. Got this thing brand spanking new, still sealed, for a grand total of $3.50 off eBay, with free shipping. Haven't played it yet, but it looks pretty cool on the back. But these three games I found at Half Price Books. Why people hadn't bought these prior to me showing up, I don't know. Luckily, I was there with a bunch of stuff to trade in that allowed me to get these games because some of them are pretty expensive. One is Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Basically, the sequel to Super Mario RPG. I did have this back in the day when I originally had my Game Boy Advance, and I loved it. I remember playing this all day long while I was at jury duty, waiting to get called to go into a courtroom, and I was not sad about it. It's a quirky little action RPG, and this series is still going strong to this day. The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap. While I cannot stand Toon Link, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I don't care. I keep it real. This is a pretty fun entry in this series. It's your standard Zelda game, but the cool thing is you get to put on this hat and it lets you shrink down to about the size of a bug. And you get to explore all these new areas, and it puts a cool new spin on the Zelda formula. And I've been looking for this next one for the longest time. It's always really expensive, and I always pass on it because usually I'm not willing to spend the kind of money that this goes for on eBay. But because I had all that credit at Half Price Books, I said, it's happening. Metroid Zero Mission! Essentially, this is a remake of the original Metroid game with new areas and better graphics and better sound. It's a tweaked version of the original. There's now a story with cutscenes to help tie it into the rest of the series. It's amazing. Starting to really get into the import scene for the Sega Saturn. Dead or Alive. Yes, this is available for the PS1, but you know what? This version is a hell of a lot better. Graphics, play control, music, everything. Just head and shoulders over the PS1 version. Surprising, because it's in 3D, and the Saturn was not known for its 3D capabilities, but Tecmo managed to pull it off. Deep Fear, which is a Resident Evil clone that takes place in an underwater mining facility. It's a cool little survival horror game, but the problem is, it is all in Japanese, which does not make it easy to play. But Deep Fear is pretty cool, even though it is cheesy as all hell. And a dude in a Facebook group was selling a whole lot of import shmups, and I was not going to pass them up because there are a lot of great ones available for the Saturn. The Gradius Deluxe Pack, which is Gradius 1 and 2 on the same disc. Even though I really do enjoy the version that's on the PC Engine, this is the definitive one right here. And the cool thing about this is, not only did it come with the spine card and some sort of a weird scratch-off ticket, it came with this like cut-out Vic Viper ship that you can make out of paper. That is super rad. Also managed to get the Salamander Deluxe Pack Plus, the arcade versions of Salamander 1 and 2 and Life Force, which is the NES version. Salamander 2. Woo! You want to play a crazy ass shmup? Damn, that one is insanely hard, yet amazing. And then one by Atlas, and that's Donpachi. I know of Dodonpachi, which I think is the sequel to this. Great arcadey top-down shmup. That is super freaking hard, dude. I love it. A lot of people, when I posted the picture of this on Instagram, was like, I like Dodonpachi a hell of a lot more than that one. Well, you know what? I've never played Dodonpachi. But I have played this one, and I like this one. So eat it.
Son of a bitch!
Forsaken, and Warhammer Shadow of the Horned Rat. This is a strategy RPG in the Warhammer universe. My friend had this back in the day, and I used to watch him play it, and I enjoyed what I saw, even though it looked extremely freaking complicated, but kind of thought it was neat too at the same time. So I always kind of was jealous that he had it, and I could never find a copy of it anywhere. So now that I do own my own copy, hooray! War of the Monsters, which is a pretty cool Godzilla-style, big-ass monsters fighting in the city, demolishing everything that's around them type of game. Really cool beat-em-up. Bloody Roar 3 and 4. Not the greatest fighting games out there. Part 4 is actually kind of uncommon from what I understand. But the big twist here is that you are able to transform into an animal while you are fighting in order to do more damage. It's kind of like your super attack, so that's kind of rad. I like the original back in the day on the PS1, so why not? Rampage, Total Destruction, La Pucelle Tactics, Armored Core 3, Marvel Nemesis, Rise of the Imperfects. It's like a dungeon crawl beat 'em up, kind of like Marvel Alliance, but not as good. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Battle Nexus. It's an arcadey beat 'em up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There was a whole bunch of these available for this generation of consoles. Best thing about this one, though, is you can unlock the original TMNT arcade game.
He knows what scares you.
Gradius 3 and 4. And Gradius 5. It's really cool to be able to play these in a row and watch the graphics and playability progress. Super awesome shmups. Really, truly super awesome. Yeah. Around the time I picked this game up, the price of it had been climbing and climbing and climbing. I know Metal Jesus talked about this game a couple times on his channel, and every time he did, the price jumped up. And it was happening again around this time when I bought it. I went to a Half Price Books and found a copy of it for $15 where everywhere else online was going for over $60. Kim Possible, What's the Switch? It's a platformer based on a Disney cartoon which I have never seen in my entire life. I have no idea what it's about, who the characters are, you know, if it's any good or not, don't really care. But it's a surprisingly fun platformer. As usual, Metal Jesus is calling these right on the nose, and this one surprises the hell out of me more than anything else. This next one I've been trying to get my hands on for a long time. This one particular game in the series is supremely expensive, probably because it came out toward the tail end of the PS2's lifespan and there weren't that many copies made. At least that's the theory. But then out of nowhere, Sega decides to do another print run of it, and the price was the standard price you would pay for a PS2 game. And I was not going to pass that up since this thing goes for usually over $100. Yakuza 2! There was a sale going on at Half Price Books for this one specific weekend where on, I think it was Friday and Saturday, your most expensive item was 40% off, and on Sunday, your most expensive item was 50% off. I went for Saturday and Sunday, got a whole bunch of different games. You've seen a couple of them already. When I went back on Sunday, while I was standing in line waiting to pay, I happened to notice this behind the counter. I asked the dude how much it was selling for, and he told me, he was like, oh, it's $50, and it's brand new, it's sealed, and for $50, I was like, yeah. But it turns out that if I did decide to buy it, it would have been my most expensive item of the day. So, 50% off.
My God, that is one heck of a deal.
Time Crisis 2. With the gun. Sealed. Never had it back in the day. Now I do. Dream fulfilled. And then this last PS2 game is an import. The only import I have for the PS2. But this is a PAL region game, which means I cannot play it on my PS2 without modding it somehow. The game is called New York Race, and as you can read above the title, it's inspired by The Fifth Element. I watched some video of this on YouTube, and I was like, damn, that looks pretty cool. It is essentially LA Rush with flying cars in the Fifth Element universe. I just wanted to have this in the collection for the Fifth Element collectability, because I love the Fifth Element. Like I said, every time I would go to Half Price Books, it was like somebody had just sold their entire collection. I would find some primo stuff there for really good prices. Surprising, because Half Price Books sometimes tends to overcharge. Cell Damage, which is kind of like Twisted Metal, but it's all cell-shaded graphics, back when it was cool. F-Zero GX, probably the fastest game in the F-Zero franchise. It will make your eyeballs bleed, man. I do believe Capcom developed this one. Graphics are insanely gorgeous and beautiful. The speed is just like insanely fast. Play control is great and tight. Everything about it is just top notch. And one of the cool things is that if you have saved your progress on this to your memory card, you can actually take your memory card to an arcade, and if they had the F-Zero AX coin op, you could transfer your game over and play it there. Sonic Heroes, it's okay. And one of the lightning rods of hate for the GameCube, Star Fox Adventures. This one is developed by Rare. The original idea behind this game was it was supposed to be called Dinosaur Planet, and it had nothing to do with Star Fox, but I guess Shigeru Miyamoto saw it and was like, ooh, that'd be great as a Star Fox game. Let's retool the whole thing. And everyone revolted when it was released. I wasn't one of them. I always kind of enjoyed it, even though it was kind of clunky to play, and I was a little bit disappointed that it wasn't your standard Star Fox type of game. For what it was, I was kind of like, this is okay, and I thought Nintendo at the time was trying to be a little adventurous with their properties. Turns out that wasn't the case. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's just different. And I like different. The Simpsons Hit and Run. It's Grand Theft Auto Simpsons style. What's not to like, other than the fact that I'm not a big fan of The Simpsons?
Because I'm an idiot. Happy?
Dead to Rights, Star Wars Starfighter Special Edition, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. I picked this one up based on the title alone. Chicago Enforcer. Gotta represent the home turf. It's a first-person shooter where you play as a Chicago gangster. What's not to like? Get out of here, Daddy Copy, you bother me.
I want him dead. I want his family dead.
Bruce Lee, Quest of the Dragon. While I remember this game getting, like, eviscerated in the ratings back in the day, I always thought the idea of playing a beat-em-up in 3D as Bruce Lee was an amazing idea. Didn't pan out that way, but it's not as bad as everyone made it out to be back then. I think it's a little more widely accepted nowadays, myself included. I remember renting it back in the day and going like, this is okay. I like it a lot more now than I did back then. Area 51, which takes the old arcade game, which was an on-rails light gun game, and turns it into a first-person shooter where you play as David Duchovny. Typecasting. And Air Force Delta Storm.